Ah, okay. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Ibraheem Masoud. I'm going to be talking about insulin and glucagon metabolic effects. So let's start from introduction. Now, insulin, glucagon, and catecholamines, they're very important in metabolism generally. Metabolism of different structures, substrates like carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Now, we're going to identify the terms anabolic and catabolic very soon in the coming slides. And I will dig down deep on the structure, function, and the clinical significance of each of the listed hormones, insulin, glucagon, and catecholamines, inshallah. All right, let's keep going. 1 second. Okay, so insulin. Insulin is the most important hormone in metabolism. So whenever you hear metabolism, just know insulin. And why is insulin the most important hormone? Because insulin is the only hormone in the body that does its job. I don't mean that that's its job like the one it's assigned to, but the job of insulin, which is the anabolic effects that it has on like glucose, amino acids, and lipids, it's only done by insulin. So if there is no insulin, nothing is going to take over insulin. But for example, for glucagon, you know, if someone has diabetes type 1 and he has no glucagon and no insulin, the problem will be mainly in the anabolism. So he will not be able to store glucose, but he will be able to break them down. And you might be asking, okay, how will he break them down if he has no glucagon? Simply because he has other stuff like the catecholamines, growth hormone, cortisol. All these stuff aid in catabolism, which is done by glucagon and these hormones. So this is why insulin is like one of its type, and it's really important. Now, of course, from your histology lecture, you know that insulin, it comes from the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. It is worth mentioning because you might get a question saying a B cell hormone. So they're not really trying to trick you because it's very easy. If you know, like the B cell, it has insulin, and the alpha cell, it has the glucagon. Just know it, like it's very basic fact. They might just put you in the question, oh, this B cell hormone is depleted, what might happen? And then you have to know the effects of insulin, but you also have to know that it comes from the B cell. Why did I put hearts beside each of these like glycogen tags and proteins? Because insulin, they love doing these listed substrates. Insulin, they take glucose, make glycogen. They take fatty acids, they make triacylglycerols. They take amino acids and they make proteins. And that is an anabolic effect. So anabolic means you build, right? Anabolic means build. Catabolic is quite the opposite. You destroy or you break down and release energy. So in anabolism, you use energy to store these products. Catabolism is the opposite. And who does catabolism? As we agreed on, catecholamines, glucagon, growth hormone, and cortisol. You will see now in a moment. Don't worry. If you have any question, guys, stop me at any moment. Stop me. I want to see your questions. Like I'll be interested to answer them. So the structure of insulin, it's quite an interesting structure. Like you have 51 amino acids, but they're not like 51 in one chain. They are two chains, the A chain and B chain. So let me zoom. 1 second, I think. Okay, let me zoom. As you can see, the alpha chain is the shorter one. It has 21. The beta chain, the B chain, it has 30. That is 51. Now, the very important thing about the structure, and you might get like a question in the exam about this, the sulfide bonds. You can appreciate that there is like SS here and there. Like, what is this? This is disulfide bonds, because one sulfide, two sulfide, that's disulfide bonds, okay? So you have two disulfide bonds between the A chain and the B chain, and that is called intermolecular disulfide chain. Intermolecular, okay? Take care of this. What about this? Now, this disulfide chain is within the A chain, okay? It's within the A chain. Now, this chain is, we call it intramolecular disulfide chain. Why intra? Intra means within, and inter means between. So be careful, okay? Just, you might like get a question. I think we got a question about the disulfide bonds, like something referring to insulin, and they said like it has double disulfide bonds between the A and B chain. So you have to know that this is insulin. You won't get a mistake in this. Now, simply, biosynthesis of insulin, now you will get this a lot, like hormones, but the peptides, you know, insulin is a peptide, glucagon is a peptide. So peptides generally, like take this as a rule, peptides, they go from pre-pro-peptide, pro-peptide, and then just a peptide. So in our case, it's pro-insulin, and then insulin. Now there is something here that you need to take care of, and that is the C peptide. Now the C peptide. Now first, let's jump to the insulin signal sequence. The insulin in the endoplasmic reticulum. You know this from your cell biology. The ER, it will take this insulin, synthesize it, translate it. It will become a whole peptide with a signal sequence. Now the ER wants to send the insulin outside. So in order to do that, it will cut the signal sequence. And after it cuts the signal sequence, pro insulin will go to the Golgi apparatus, right? And as you can appreciate, there is A, B, and C chains here. In the Golgi apparatus, the C peptide will be separated from the AB chain, but there is a catch here. It will be separated molecularly, okay? So it will be removed from it, but there's a thing. They will be stored in one vesicle. So imagine my hand is a vesicle, and in my hand there is A, B, and C chain. The AB chain obviously are the insulin that we want, and the C chain is just there. It just exists. It literally doesn't do anything. But there's something important, and that is, now imagine this vesicle is released into the blood. So what comes out to the blood? Insulin and the C peptide. The insulin, it has like a half-life, sorry, of like 6 minutes. So it will degrade really fast, and we won't be able to spot it or like measure it. So what do we do to measure the insulin? We measure the C peptide, and you might get a question about this. That is why I'm giving it time. The C peptide is how you measure insulin. So you might get a question, a man, he just left the house, he didn't have breakfast, he has diabetes type 1, he has 5 kids, 2 wives, whatever, 2 houses, 1 car, some big clinical scenario. And at the end, he will be like, he presented to your clinic and you want to measure his insulin levels to check if he has any problems. What do you check for? Your answer immediately should be C peptide, and that is, it has longer half-life. Very easy concept. If you master it, you will get this question right, inshallah. Now, next test, we're going to talk about the insulin degradation and secretion. Obviously, when insulin is out, it needs to be secreted to be out, right? And after it's secreted, we need to degrade it because we don't need it to stay there. And that is like for everything. As I told you, the half-life is 6 minutes, okay? And these are some things that trigger the insulin release. And you have to keep them in mind because, you know, these stuff are inevitable. You will get this question now, maybe next year, maybe the year after. You don't know. You need to know what triggers insulin. It's very important. So one of the, like, you know, stimulants of insulin, and it is that like everyone knows it as glucose. So glucose is sugar, you all know. So glucose triggers insulin release. Another thing is amino acids. You have the gastrointestinal peptide hormones. Now, the gastrointestinal peptide hormones, it's important to know why. It's important to know it. Why? Because look, there is a concept, or actually a question. I'll ask a question first, and then I'll explain the concept for you. Now, if you have a man in your clinic and you want to give him glucose, you want the insulin to be released more, okay? Do you give him the glucose orally or IV? IV means in the blood directly. You give him glucose directly. Or you could give him like sugar cube or something in his mouth. What does, where does it release more insulin? In the mouth or in the blood? And this is very important, and I'll tell you why. I just need an answer, guys. If you can answer, if you can't, I will answer it myself, no problem. Okay, someone said the mouth, and that is absolutely correct, and I'll tell you why. IV insulin will go to the liver and the pancreas, and then will release insulin. But the mouth, the glucose, will go down to the stomach, and it will also proceed to the pancreas. But in addition to that, it will release gastrointestinal peptide hormones. And the gastrointestinal peptide hormones like GIP, which is, I think, glucagon inhibitor protein, and GLP is glucagon-like protein 1. These hormones will go to the pancreas and release even more insulin. So you have now double the glucose and the peptide hormones in the GI. So this question, like, it's very unlikely to come to you, but if it does come, you will be the brilliant guy who answered a really minutiae question. But it's important. Keep it in mind. Now the movement of insulin, it's no surprise because I just told you the movement of insulin, but this is more fancy and more nerdy. I don't like it, but I will talk about it regardless. So as I told you, the insulin is a peptide, so it is translated in the ER when it comes from the as an mRNA from the nucleus. After that, pre-proinsulin with the signal sequence, RER will cut the signal sequence, go to the Golgi. The Golgi will cut the C peptide and then store in the vesicles, as you can see here. And then when they are released all at once. And the C peptide is proportional to the insulin, which is why it is very important to measure. Okay, very easy concept. I hope you're all caught up and good until now. I hope no one is behind. Okay, I think everyone is good. Okay, so glucose effects on insulin secretion. And by the way, guys, if I'm going too fast, let me know. I am doing it because this lecture is very easy and I'm pretty sure you know like most of the stuff by now. But it's fine. Still stop me if you need something. Okay, so glucose effects on insulin secretion. I just told you that glucose is stimulant and it stimulates insulin release. So how? Okay, first of all, it has to be through a receptor, and that is GLUT2. It's just called GLUT2, and that is found in pancreas and liver only, exclusively. Why is GLUT2 important? Why not GLUT4 in the pancreas and liver? Can someone answer this question? I'm not expecting you to, but if you do, you're brilliant. Please do answer the question. Why is there GLUT2 in the pancreas and liver? What's special about GLUT2? Why not GLUT4? If you're not able to answer, I'll tell you. I'm not expecting much anyway. Someone said, oh, someone actually answered the question. Great job. Yes, it is not insulin dependent. So GLUT2 in the pancreas and liver, you mean it's not insulin dependent? Yes, because when glucose enters the body, we don't expect there to be insulin beforehand, right? Glucose is supposed to release insulin, cause the release of insulin. So glucose will go through the free receptors, we can call them, that they don't need anything, just dependent by their own. They're always open. And then the glucose will go into the GLUT receptors of pancreas and liver. Why liver? To affect the metabolism. You want to shift the liver from, glycogenesis to gluconeogenesis and all that. And of course, in the pancreas, you need to release insulin. Now, how is insulin released? Now, this is also a good question. The answer to that simply will be that when glucose enters the pancreas, it will be broken down to ATP. As you learned in MOL 1, I think, that this glycolysis will release ATP, and then this ATP will close potassium channels. And now recall from physiology, when potassium channels are closed, what happens to the cell? Depolarization. When depolarization happens, calcium channels open. What happens when calcium channels open? They go in to the pancreas, to the beta cells of Langerhans, and then calcium will cause exocytosis to the vesicles of insulin. So this is how insulin is released by glucose. Very easy, very simple. If you want me to repeat, I can do that. If not, we can move on. I'm taking it as we can continue, okay? Okay, we can move on. Now, as I explained to you that if we close the potassium channel, depolarization will happen, calcium will open up, calcium will cause the insulin vesicles to leave. So we have a drug that does this, and that is called sulfonylurea. It's not really used nowadays. It's like it was used for diabetes type 2 or for like mild cases of diabetes type 2. Okay, not type 1. Why not type 1? Because type 1 diabetes, they don't even have insulin. Type 2 diabetes, they have insulin, but like they need more of it, or like it's resistant, so they need some aiding in that, and that is by sulfonylureas. But like I think there are other drugs that are more efficient. But anyway, the mechanism of this is very simple. It closes the K channels, cause calcium to come in, calcium will take the vesicles and leave. So now you have insulin in the blood. Very simple. Now there is a significant thing that this is something I love about biochemistry. Like this concept is very cool. Look at this. So hexokinase and glucokinase, they quite do the same job, but like they're not really the same as in affinity and Vmax. As you can see, there's a difference. So hexokinase has high affinity and low Vmax. Now glucokinase has low affinity and high Vmax. I'm not saying anything new here. Okay. Now look at this. Hexokinase, because it has high affinity and low Vmax, this means it will fill up pretty quickly and stop accepting more glucose. Now, if I ask you, so where do you expect this to be found? The answer will simply be, you will expect this to be found in every cell except the liver and the pancreas. Why is that? Because in the liver and pancreas, we actually need more glucose to come in and be phosphorylated by glucokinase. So now we have glucokinase. Glucokinase, of course, will not have a high affinity, because if it has a high affinity and high Vmax, that will be a disaster. Why? Because the glucose will go to the liver, and then the liver will be, it will work up pretty quickly, take up all the glucose due to the high affinity. So there's a good balance here, subhanAllah. Right? So glucokinase, low affinity, high Vmax, so that it can take little amount of glucose over time, but it can take them for a long time. And that is to maintain the metabolism. If you got this concept, I'm very proud of you. If not, I can repeat, and I'll be very proud of you too. I think we can move on. No chat, nothing at all. Got it. Amazing. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so now this is just showing you what happens to you when you eat a meal. Now, as expected, right after you eat a meal, glucose will be up, shoot. Insulin will also be up because the glucose is up, shoot. Now, what will be down? Glucagon. Why? Because glucagon will break down glycogen to glucose, and if we already have glucose, then we don't need it from the body, right? So glucagon will be suppressed. It's very simple. Now, we also said that amino acids and fatty acids, they have an effect on insulin, and insulin has an effect on them. Like it's two ways, right? So when you eat a protein-rich meal or a fatty acid-rich meal, right, which is like fatty meal, burger, whatever, okay? Now, this will also increase insulin, and the reason is very simple, very, very simple. And that is because insulin will aid in the storage of the amino acids to make them proteins, and will aid in the storage of fatty acids to make them, you guessed it, triacid glycerols, okay, which is tags. There are stuff like LPLs and this. I think you took it from the previous term. There is no need to go over it again. Okay. Now we'll talk about the gastrointestinal peptide hormones. I already have talked about them, but I will do it again. It's a good concept, like it's very cool. Look at GIP, GLP, they're only in the small intestine. And the way they work is that they increase the sensitivity of beta cells. So now beta cells are more sensitive to glucose. As I told you, when you eat the glucose from your mouth, okay, the glucose itself will increase the insulin. And now because the sensitivity of beta cells is increased, they will be more sensitive to glucose and release even more insulin. But if from IV, I asked this question earlier, oral glucose or IV, which increases more insulin? And the answer would be oral glucose. And that is due to the release of GIP, GLP in the small intestine. Very easy concept. We can move on. Now, when insulin is inhibited when something happens, okay? What happens that makes insulin inhibited? Now, let's say you just finished your meal. Do you think, like after let's say a few hours of you finish your meal, now you're hungry again, do you think insulin will be out? I will say no. Now that's my answer. I personally think insulin won't be out like after like few hours from the meal, and that is because insulin already has worked and shifted everything to the storage form, the fuel form. So glucose became glycogen, fatty acids became triacid glycerols, amino acids became proteins. So now your fuels and storage is full. When that happens, what happens to insulin? Insulin just stops. My work is done. I'm done. I can leave now, and it leaves. Another time is like physiologic stress. Now imagine you're like, someone honked at you and you just got mad at him, and now you put him in a fight, right? You don't fight him, but don't fight. I'm not supporting fighting, but let's say you did fight. Your body is also ready for that. Like even if it's not a good action, it's always ready for that. So physiologic stress also could be other types of stress, not only fighting. It could be when you're studying, when you're at the gym, generally when you need to put effort. Why? So we said insulin is the building material. It will get glucose, make it glycogen, so it will store. Do we need to store glucose or use it when we're fighting? My answer to that is use it. So other hormones like catecholamines will be out to use and utilize our body substrates, and products like sugar, fatty acids. All of this will be broken down. This is why cardio makes you, more lean, because when you're doing cardio, you're putting in the effort, and this is physiologic stress. It's not bad. It's a good thing. catecholamines will be out. It will burn down your fats, your amino acids, your glucose, but it starts from the glucose. It will burn it out first, and then it will proceed to the amino acids or fats. Depends on your body composition, of course, and genetics. We can move on from this. I think this is a very clear concept. Okay. Now, can you repeat the first point? Yeah, I can repeat the first one, sure. So I said insulin is inhibited when fuels are full. So what is the fuels in your body? The fuels in your body are proteins, okay, triacylglycerols, and the glycogen. Now imagine these fuels are actually full, right? You have plenty of proteins, you have plenty of triacylglycerols, you have plenty of glycogen. Now, these products, they don't need more insulin because you're full of them. Now, if you have any glucose, it will be utilized a different way than just, building them up. Because now imagine if the fuels, they're not full, or like if insulin is not inhibited when the fuels are full, that would make, it would keep you on the storing state. You will keep storing stuff, fats, proteins, glucose, even when you're full. And by full, I mean the fuels are full, not you're full as in eating. You get me? Because think of it like a negative feedback. So if insulin makes this, if this is full, then it will inhibit insulin because we don't need more of that. You get it? Like I'm using this and that, but I hope that makes it clear. Okay, great. Now, what does insulin do to glucose? Now we know that yes, insulin, it does store glucose, opens up the GLUT receptors, but there are also other things that it does. Now, first thing, it increases the glycogen synthesis. As I told you, there is glucose. We need to store it in a form of glycogen. That is multiple glucose linked together with some bonds and stuff. And that happens in the muscle and liver. So in the muscle and liver, glucose will be stored as a form of glycogen. Very easy. As well as in the adipose. So it will also increase the glucose uptake in muscles and adipose. So why in the adipose? To make triacylglycerols, fatty acids, and the glucose will be converted to glycerol and then triacylglycerol. You see, it's very nice. And of course, the glucose uptake in the muscle, because you need energy for the muscle, like when you work out, like when you're using your muscles for certain activity, you will need that glucose for later time. This is why when you eat, insulin does a good job in storing all of your food in the right places so that when you need them, they're there and they help you. Now, GLUT4 is an insulin-dependent receptor, and keep this in mind. It is the only, I think, insulin-dependent receptor because 1 is in the brain and 3 is in the blood cells. So these don't need insulin generally. So it's mainly GLUT4. Okay, and GLUT4 is found in the adipose, cardiac muscle, and skeletal muscle. Right? It makes sense because we only need to store them when insulin is there. Now, another thing that insulin does is phosphorylation and dephosphorylation. And we talked about this. I gave a lecture about this, I think, last semester. So I'm not going to go through the phosphorylation things again because it's not required for you in this lecture, okay? Now, generally, what it does is it decreases glucose production because that makes sense. We have glucose and insulin is taking this glucose, putting it in the liver. So in the liver, do we need to make more glucose? That wouldn't make sense. So we will stop the glucose production. Now, another thing is gluconeogenesis, glycogenolysis. Gluconeogenesis is the production of glucose from amino acids or fatty acids. Now, glycogenolysis is the breakdown of glycogen to glucose. That also is production of glucose, and we don't need that because we have plenty of glucose right now. Insulin is inhibiting this to maintain an equilibrium between stored glucose and the actual glucose that is present in the blood and in the organs. Very beautiful homeostasis. Okay, so how does insulin help lipids? Like you have fats in your body now, how does it help? So the way it works is that it dephosphorylates and inactivates HSL. So HSL is HSL. This HSL, it will break down lipids, right? So if it breaks down lipids, it will increase the fatty acids. Do we need the fatty acids right now? Because we already have fatty acids from the food we ate. So no, the HSL, what will happen? It will be inhibited by, again, insulin. HSL also stands for hormone sensitive lipase. So lipase means break down lipids. Insulin inhibits that because we don't need lipids right now. We need to store the lipids, not to break them down. Who needs to break them down? Glucagon and catecholamines. It also increases metabolism and transport of glucose in adipocytes. We already talked about this, which is in the GLUT4 adipose tissue. Now, another thing opens the receptors, like as I told you, glycerol 3-phosphate for tag synthesis. I told about this, and the LPL, of course, for tag synthesis. I also mentioned this before. The LPL, lipoprotein lipase, you know about it. You took it. So what happens is the lipoprotein lipase, it makes tag, and tag is the storage form of lipids. So what do you say about storage? Insulin loves that. It will activate it then. Very simple. This is how you think about things. Does it store? Does it break down? If it breaks down, so insulin will stop it. If it stores, insulin will activate it and will support it. This is how insulin works. For proteins, the idea is the same. Amino acids is the broken down form of proteins. So if we want to store amino acids, we store them in the form of proteins. And again, what did we say about storing insulin? That's its game, right? It loves storing stuff. So it stores amino acids in the form of protein. And as we said, insulin is anabolic, means it builds, it promotes the storage, inhibits breakdown, exactly what I told you. So it increases glycogen. The things, remember these three things that I put heart beside because insulin loves them, keeps making from them. Glycogen, triacylglycerol, and proteins, of course. Very easy, very simple. Okay, this is more molecular now. I think you will take it in molecular signaling, but I'm going to mention it because it's important. Now, there is a receptor for insulin. Insulin will not just magically, get the glucose in. It has to work in some way, right? First of all, let me put there is a pointer, just a second. Okay, so you have GLUT4 and vesicles in the say the muscle cells. Okay, now in the muscle cells also there's a receptor that is an insulin receptor. This insulin receptor is a tyrosine kinase receptor. Now this was not mentioned in this lecture, but I'm pretty sure you need to know it for other lectures and even for the future. Like it's very important. Insulin, tyrosine kinase. Okay, the insulin will bind to this receptor and some signaling will go on. Now this you don't need to know for this lecture. For this lecture, you don't need to know the signaling, but eventually it will pull the GLUT receptor up to the membrane. The GLUT receptor will stick to the membrane, open up, the glucose will come into the GLUT receptor, through the GLUT receptor into the cell. And this is how insulin opens doors for glucose. Very simple and nice concept. Okay. This is just the same thing I drew. Like my drawing is way simpler than this. This is a lot of things, but it's exactly what I said. Okay. And now this is like a summary slide. I got it from Google. Here's a resource. You can take a look at it. This is exactly everything we said, but in one slide. If you understand everything you read on this slide, you understand the whole half of the lecture, which is about insulin. Insulin is a big guy, by the way. Now, the rest is very easy, which is about the glucagon, catecholamines, and all that stuff. It's very easy. Now we want to compare both insulin and glucagon. We said that the glucagon is literally the opposite of insulin, right? But the glucagon is not alone. Glucagon has the catecholamines with it, which is epinephrine, norepinephrine. You know about them. Now, if insulin decreases glycogenolysis, which is the breakdown of glycogen, then glucagon will increase the production of glycogen and decrease glycogenolysis. You get this? So if insulin stores glucose as glycogen, glucagon will break down glycogen and give you glucose back. When does this happen? When you have energy depletion, when you're fasting, when you're in physiologic stress, you need the energy from glucose, so it will break down glycogen to give you glucose, more energy to keep you alive, basically. Now let's talk about some structures of glucagon. It's in alpha cells. We said insulin is in the beta cells of iris of Langerhans. Glucagon is in the alpha cells, okay? This is like, they might tell you, as I said about insulin, they might tell you an alpha cell hormone, or like there's a problem in alpha cells, so you have to just keep this in mind, okay? Now, glucagon is not alone. It has brothers and sisters. It has a big family. There's glucagon, epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, and growth hormone. All of these work exactly the same job, almost exactly. And that is, they break down everything we stored to give you energy. That is the goal of glucagon and its sisters, to give you energy. And during what? Stress, again, workout, activities. So it increases glucose generally, okay? How does it increase glucose? It increases glycogenolysis, break down glucose, and the production of glucose from nothing, or from amino acids, which is gluconeogenesis. Now the structure of glucagon, like insulin, it has a structure, and that is 29 amino acids in a single chain. There is no peptides, there is no disulfide bonds, there is nothing. It's just one chain, 29 amino acids, and that's it. Because it's a peptide, pre-pro-glucagon will become pro-glucagon to glucagon. Same story as insulin, except there is no C chain here. So the only way to measure glucagon is measuring glucagon itself. This is the only way. And it also has a short half-life, which is almost approximately 6 minutes, same as insulin. Structurally, it's very similar to insulin, okay? But the difference is the insulin has disulfide bonds. Don't forget that. Glucagon actions is mainly on the liver, okay? And it's catabolic. What does catabolic means? It's the opposite of anabolic. If anabolic is building, then catabolic is breaking down to give you energy and the substrates. So when is glucagon released? As I told you, when glucose is decreased. Like during states where you have less glucose in your body. And when is that? When you're fasting. When you're fasting, you're not eating, so there is no glucose source except from your own body. And this is where glucagon and the other hormones are important to break down the glycogen stores and other stores in your body to make glucose and give you glucose to keep you alive and support other cells in the body. Very nice concept. Now, this is a nice thing. It's about amino acids. We said amino acids, they increase insulin, so the insulin stores amino acids. But there is a catch, okay? Amino acids also increase glucagon. How? Why does it increase both? Why? Let's think. So when you eat amino acids, are basically protein. Now the amino acids in your blood increase, they will stimulate insulin release. When the insulin goes out, it will store the amino acids as proteins. But remember, you're not storing only amino acids, you're storing other things like insulin will also act on glucose. So if you just ate proteins and no glucose, and insulin, regardless of that, did store the glucose, now you have less glucose in your blood. So glucagon will sense that, oh, insulin, you're storing everything, but no one told you to store glucose. But the insulin is like, that's my job anyway, so it's like it's not as false, right? So glucagon will go out and increase the glucose in the blood. And this is why when you eat amino acids, it will increase the release of glucagon. Keep this in mind. It is a very important concept, and there's a good chance that you will get a question about it. For them, this is the tricky question in this lecture, so keep it in mind. Now, if even the tricky question comes, or like we can say tricky, you can easily answer it. Catecholamines, as I told you, when the catecholamines are out, they also help and aid in the glucagon release because they all do the same job, so they help each other out. Okay. This is one similar. So the same thing happens as I told you. Precursors will go. The glucagon will go. You know, it's stimulated by amino acids. Epinephrine, no glucose will also stimulate the glucagon. It will break down stuff. Someone is asking, so amino acids release in both? Yes, amino acids will cause release of both insulin and glucagon. And I remember we got a question about this, like what causes the release of both insulin and glucagon. So you have to know that it's amino acids, and that is because insulin will hide the glucose, so glucagon will compensate for that glucose that is stored by insulin when you eat amino acids. I hope that makes clear. Is that clear? Should I repeat? Someone asked if I can repeat the points in red. I didn't see that, but what points in red? Do you mean this? Okay, I think we're good. Yeah. Okay, we can keep going from here. So glucagon, it increases the breakdown of glycogen. We said this like 100 times in the liver, of course, not the muscle. Just keep this in mind that the glucagon will not break down the glycogen in the muscle, only in the liver. Same thing for gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis only happens in the liver, right? I think you know this concept from a lecture that is dedicated to gluconeogenesis. So I'm not going to go over this. Okay. Now, glucagon also favors the oxidation of fat. Why? Because you're breaking down fat by oxidizing them. And also formation of ketone bodies, because that is also another way to give you energy, right? So anything that gives you energy and substrates by breaking down, that would be glucagon's job. Increase uptake of amino acids. We said this again. no, this is different. Okay, why does it increase the uptake of amino acids? So the reason is like why when glucagon is out, it increases the uptake of amino acids. This is different than this concept. Okay, this concept is basically because we need the amino acids as precursors for what? For glucose in the liver, which is a gluconeogenesis. So glucagon will be like, okay, hey, amino acids, we need you for a bit, and then it will take the amino acids, give it to the liver. The liver will take the amino acids and will make glucose using gluconeogenesis, which you also studied in different lecture. I hope that makes it clear. Okay, we can keep going. So glucagon works by, it's very simple. Like the way it works, it's different from the insulin actually. It works by adenyl cyclase. You know, you took it also this, like to bind to adenyl cyclase, G protein, sorry, adenyl cyclase, CMP will increase, and then some enzymes will work. This is very simple. The overall effects is increased glycogenolysis, breakdown of glycogen, the making of glucose, oxidation of fatty acid, ketogenesis, that you make keto bodies to feed the body, and also you take amino acids. And why do you take amino acids? We said this to aid in gluconeogenesis. Very, very nice. Okay. Now, believe it or not, I think we're done with both insulin, glucagon, and catecholamines. Now we just have to go over some clinical relevance, like hypoglycemia, okay? So hypoglycemia, there is 70 to 100 milligram per deciliter, of course, that is. There is 70, there is 40. Now, the measurement is 70 to 100 is normal, actually. Below 70, that would be hypoglycemia. So if someone has below 70 milligram per deciliter of glucose in the blood, then he is in a hypoglycemic state. That is official, that is clinical, and everything. You treat it. Now, below 40, that is a disaster. That is a severe hypoglycemia. You need to do something about this immediately. Like you cannot wait a second. And you can see like there is some clinical signs, like when you're hypoglycemic. Of course, I don't think any of us will be hypoglycemic like easily, especially that we're like in a young age, but maybe like elderly or people who have diabetes, like hunger, release of glucagon, all of this, they will feel it. And sweating. Sweating is a very important sign of hypoglycemia, by the way. Like it's a very important thing to know that, oh, this guy is having hypoglycemia. He will have like lethargy. He might lose consciousness and start sweating, and his heart will be racing. You know, everything is trying to keep him alive. He's in a state of extreme stress. Why? Because the stress hormones, epinephrine, glucagon, cortisol, are trying to compensate for the lost glucose. Anything below that, you go, it can have coma, seizure, eventually might cause brain damage and death. This is exactly what I just talked about, but this is a different slide from Lippincott. And there are different types of hypoglycemia. One type is insulin-induced, and that is just as the name indicates. Say you have a diabetic patient, you give him insulin, okay? And you tell him, oh, take this insulin every 1 week. And then they take it every 2 days. Now, for the second day, the second time he took insulin, he doesn't need it, right? But what happens now? He has more insulin in his body, like it's misuse, okay? And this insulin will cause hypoglycemia. Postprandial, it's very interesting. Like postprandial is when you actually eat glucose, you get hypoglycemia. Now, the way I just said it makes it sound confusing, but it actually makes sense and interesting. So say you're fasting, and now you want to break your fast, you want to eat. That's why they don't advise to eat like processed sugar and really sugary meals at breakfast, right? When you break your fast, you should break your fast with something like dates, subhanallah. Dates, they won't cause you any troubles or harm. So let's say you ate like 5 donuts on breakfast, okay? When you break your fast, sorry. And now your glucose will jump up. Then what happens? Insulin will go up again to try to counter. Like insulin will be shocked, will be like, wow, what's happening here? A lot of glucose coming in, all the insulin will flush out, take the glucose back, and even more, you will get then hypoglycemia. This is very common, especially in months like Ramadan. Unfortunately, some people, they go madness on the breakfast, like when they break their fast, and they eat very highly processed food. Like that is another issue. Now, fasting hypoglycemia, it causes neuroglycopenia. So someone with diabetes type 1, actually, they cannot fast because they don't have enough hormones to compensate for the glucose that will be lost during fasting. So that complication might be neuroglycopenia. Keep this in mind. They might, but I'm not sure. I don't think they'll ask about it, but just keep it in mind, just in case. Now, of course, all of this you can treat it with subcutaneous glucagon, and that is you get something with a syringe and you put it under the cutaneous tissue, and what happens is this syringe will like keep releasing glucagon in like short, times, and this will keep you like in a high glucose state, not a high glucose state, but the normal levels. Okay, you can treat hypoglycemia this way. Or you can just feed the person a sugar cube if it's like fasting, postpartum, I don't think so. If it's fasting, if it's insulin induced too. Okay, so it's very important to know that the glucagon and catecholamines, they act in the short term. How? This means that when you eat right now, when you're not eating, say for like 2 hours, okay, and you feel hungry now. I don't think someone gets hungry in 2 hours, but say you did. Immediately, the first line of action will be from the glucagon and catecholamines. That's what we mean by short term. This will go out and they will increase the glucose. Now, say someone is like fasting, let's say after Ramadan, right? It's 1 month. So the long-term effects will increase the growth hormone and the cortisol. Cortisol, not always. Cortisol is like in severe stress, but growth hormone, it's like good when it's increased. It aids in the building of the body and keeping us healthy, which is why like fasting for 1 month could be useful. It could use the old resources. Now your body is more ready for any moments of stress, and it will have like plenty of hormones to act up and make you strong all the time. This is why like fasting is like one way how fasting is healthy. Okay, now we said epinephrine is very important. It acts very similar to glucagon in terms of breaking down and being catabolic, and it's also its best friend. Okay, now in type 1 diabetes, why, as I told you, the complication is mainly because of high glucose, not low glucose. It could be both, but mainly the high glucose. Why? Because most of the time it's insulin that's defect, and if it's like a problem in glucagon, the epinephrine will kind of make up for it, sometimes, or it can like prolong the moment of fasting for a little bit, but it will not make it critical like the problem of high glucose. This is why epinephrine is very important. And as written here, it promotes these 4 glycogenolysis, lipolysis, inhibits insulin, of course, which is the enemy of glucagon. They're actually friends. I would say they're friends. Yeah, they're quite like cool with each other. They maintain metabolism. They keep you alive. Now, glucagon, it also stimulates glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis. You've seen this like 100 times now. Now, there's something bad about alcohol. Actually, everything is bad about alcohol, but like something that is relevant to your lecture, and that is when someone consumes alcohol, some alcohol like products like NADH, what will happen? The NADH will shift glucose precursors into other substrates. Literally, that's simple, okay? You don't need to know the details, just know that alcohol, when it's metabolized, it will increase some substrates like NADH. And this NADH will cause problems because in order to have glucose substrates, you need to have less NADH. So more NADH will inhibit these substrates, and now it will be hard for your body to make glucose. And that means there is a good chance of hypoglycemia. So during states of stress and someone is like an alcohol consumer, he will find troubles keeping his blood levels of glucose normal. So it basically sabotages gluconeogenesis, and that is a sad face. So in summary, very simple, very easy lecture. In summary, synthesis of protein, fat, glucose is done by insulin, okay, synthesis. And it inhibits glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis, ketogenesis, lipolysis. If you look at glucagon, it's quite the opposite. So glucagon will increase these things because glucagon will need to break down and insulin will need to store. They work against each other, but they're still friends. And of course, glucagon will inhibit the making of glycogen, and that is storing glucose. So glucagon does not want storing, insulin does not want breaking down. Simple. Now for the questions. Before we jump into the questions, does anyone have any questions? Okay, repeat the alcohol part, sure. So someone consumed alcohol. Okay, I will draw you a nice little sketch here. Say someone has alcohol. Let's put like Al for alcohol. Now the alcohol will be metabolized into some things, and these things will yield NADH. Okay, let's put NADH here. So this NADH, what it does is it inhibits what? Some things that make glucose. You know that pyruvate and oxaloacetate, they make glucose, right? So this NADH, they will go here and they will inhibit these substrates, okay? And if you notice here in the upper graph, this is how you make glucose. You start from pyruvate, first other amino acids, then you go to pyruvate, and from pyruvate you reverse glycolysis, which is a gluconeogenesis, and make glucose. Now imagine this step is inhibited, okay? What happens? You cannot proceed with gluconeogenesis. So basically, alcohol inhibits gluconeogenesis. So now there's a high chance of hypoglycemia, and that is how they're related to each other. Is that clear? I can repeat if you didn't get it. I hope that's clear. Did you get it? Okay, perfect. Now we have a few questions, like 3-4 slides, easy questions. So this is the first question. I'll give you like 10 seconds. It doesn't need more than that. Okay, did you get the answer? Yep. That is D. That is true because catecholamines, they inhibit insulin. Very easy. I don't think we need to go over it. It's very easy. Yes, it's D, indeed. 10 seconds. Did you get the answer? So someone just had a meal. Yep, it's C. If anything needs explanation, let me know. But you got them right basically, and I don't think anyone has a trouble in this. This is quite an easy concept because someone is full. Now everything is being converted to storage form. Very easy. I think this is the last question. Wow, amazing. You got like 100% of the answers right. MashaAllah. Yes, and that would be exactly B, because this is the concept we explained. Blockade channels, depolarization, calcium will come in, increase in secretion. Perfect. I'm really glad that you got them all right. MashaAllah, proud of you. And I hope I made the concept very clear about the story, the nice little story about glucagon and insulin. If you have any questions, don't feel free to feel free to reach me out. This is my email, and this is my number. Okay, it's a very easy lecture. Alhamdulillah, that was a good lecture. No questions? You're welcome anytime. If anyone has any question before we stop. Okay, I think we can stop the meeting. GND can